Good. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. So it gives me immense pleasure and pride on behalf of our hosts at ZSL. So we're here for those joining us online. We're in the incredible surroundings of London Zoo. And we at Global Canopy, I'm the Executive Director of Global Canopy. My name is Niki Mardas. We're partnering with ZSL and the Stockholm Environment Institute to bring you Forest IQ, which we will be talking about in a short time, and which represents a true collaborative endeavor among different sectors, different wonderful people who I'm going to thank now, so I don't forget to thank them later. Thank you to everyone who has made this platform, the work that has gone into it for years on alignment in this deforestation, tackling deforestation sector. We are building on huge amounts of work that have gone before, and countless other organizations and dedicated professionals, and of course people above all living and working in forests. So a thank you to everyone who's made this possible. We will be saying a bit more about Forest IQ shortly, and then we have our dear friend Danny Carreira from the Tropical Forest Alliance at the World Economic Forum, who will be hosting a panel, and will introduce the panelists shortly. So how can we be part of the solution in the sector that we are focused on here today, looking at deforestation and focused on the finance sector? So for those who've joined online, my name is Niki Mardas. I'm Executive Director of Global Canopy, one of the 3 partners in Forest IQ that we're launching today. And I've been talking to the finance sector on deforestation for a long time. And in 2010, there was an unprecedented drought in the Amazon. We've heard about the Amazon today. And it was called one in 100 years, but 5 years earlier, of course, there had been another one quite like it. And we went to finance sector colleagues as an organization, and we said, look, this embodies risk. There is risk here for you. There is risk in your portfolios. There is risk in the valuation of companies when we see what's going on with deforestation, and it's not a risk that is being well managed. So we got agreement. I mean, you can't get too much disagreement with that. And we got some support from financial institutions back in 2009, 2010 to go to big companies and ask them about their deforestation risk to disclose on it. So we launched something called the Forest Footprint Disclosure Project, which in due course over the years grew and became CDB Forests. But when we went to the same financial institutions and said, okay, how about your exposure, your portfolios, your policies on deforestation? The answer was no to that action. And to be fair, the reasoning was logical, to say, well, we haven't got the data, so we've asked the companies, we're helping you to get information disclosure, but right now we don't know what our exposure is, so how can we manage it? So that was the problem in 2010. And if I can switch to, I haven't got my slides, but they may come up, but I will keep going since we have limited time. So look, this is 2023. This is a truly unprecedented, you want unprecedented, it's today in the Amazon. The water levels are at their lowest for over 120 years, according to the BBC. And we have a slightly better situation vis-a-vis other parts of the puzzle. We have action by a number of players, but the environmental conditions are getting much worse. We've heard that from Liz. We've heard about the fires. The science panel for the Amazon is focused on tipping points with incredible repercussions potentially for the region as a whole, for its economies, and for all of us. So today, we have finance sector at the table. You know, that is different. Our analysis shows that only 20% of major financial institutions worldwide are taking any action on deforestation, so we still have a long way to go. but we have leadership. We have leaders taking action. So we have the FSDA. Many of you are part of the Finance Sector Deforestation Action Initiative, which is a group of financial institutions who are making a commitment to deforestation-free portfolios by 2025. And we've heard lots of commitments before, but this group is taking practical action and sharing that action with other financial institutions so we can get traction across the sector. We have growing compliance and policy pressure. This is the big one. We can make all the commitments we like, but what we're seeing now is a tightening compliance net. We have the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, its leadership, Mark Carney, Mike Bloomberg, saying that transition plans to net zero are incomplete without action or inclusion of deforestation this decade. So now, transition plans for net zero are incomplete without action on deforestation. And we have an EU law and laws in other jurisdictions which are groundbreaking. They are saying that major companies need to undertake due diligence to manage and address their risks on deforestation, and that creates risks in turn for financial sector, for portfolios, for valuations. But these jurisdictions are looking at extending these laws to apply to the finance sector as well. So that may be coming down the line. And finally, we have a growing or increasingly recognized nature crisis alongside the climate crisis. We now have a global biodiversity framework, a kind of Paris Agreement for nature to come alongside that on climate. We have a task force for nature-related financial disclosures, and we're delighted to have representation from that group here today. So deforestation is a vital bridge between climate and nature and makes absolute sense as a priority area for the finance sector to act on. So really, my message on this is it's a question of when for the finance sector on deforestation, not if. And something else that has changed in 2023 is, in comparison to 2010, the data landscape has transformed. I mean, it's beyond recognition. So we've had huge innovation over the last decade. We have, incredible granularity and accessibility of satellite data. We have company reporting, which was at zero. We've got a plethora of company reporting on deforestation and nature loss. And we've had huge innovations in data on supply chains. So good news, right? Lots of data now. But also, in a sense, bad news. Lots of data now. It's almost a new kind of excuse. There's so much information. Where do I actually begin? So our mission, Global Canopy's mission, Forest IQ's mission, is to simplify that data landscape for finance, to enable the leaders to take action and to remove excuses for the laggards. And in that spirit, at COP26 in Glasgow, we launched guidance for finance sector, for financial institutions on tackling deforestation in their portfolios. It's stepwise guidance. You can start right at the beginning. It's available online for various different types of finance sector. We did that with FSDA members and also the climate champions who are represented here today. And at that same time at COP26, we embarked on this data journey. We said, okay, if we're going to give guidance to the finance sector on deforestation, we need to make the data more accessible. So after 2 years of work with support from the Norwegian government, I'm absolutely delighted on behalf of the Forest IQ partners to be launching it here today. And the Forest IQ mission is simple. It's to support financial institutions to get to deforestation-free portfolios and drive sector-wide change, which is what we need. And to do that via identifying portfolio risk more straightforwardly, and to drive better engagement with companies so we can see change going through the system rather than false solutions like divestment, which should only be a last resort. We need to drive change. So an alliance of leading nonprofits in this space have come together, Global Canopy, Stockholm Environment Institute, and of course ZSL, who are hosting us today. And we've been wonderfully supported by finance sector partners. I'll say a bit more about that in a short while. So I want to just take 3 quick lenses through which to try and explain a little bit about the value add of Forest IQ. I know you've all seen lots of tools coming onto the marketplace, and that's wonderful. We want more tools. But is this different? How is it different? So firstly, see if this works. I want to talk about alignment. There are 3 factors here. So alignment across sectors, collaboration, Liz talked a little bit about this. It's a truism that we all need to collaborate to solve these complex problems. But in practice, of course, it's much harder to build the understanding between sectors and the trust that is needed to move forward between very different groups, non-profits who have the data on nature, because we've been at it for a long time before it became a profitable thing to look at. Finance sector of all different types, from all different countries, and data providers, big data providers, among many other stakeholders, governments. So Forest IQ is focused on those deep relationships. You may wonder what this is. These are NGO shoes on the left, which I'm wearing as we speak, to my wife's shame, with a suit, wrong. And finance sector shoes on the right. These belong to our dear friend José Pugas, who is not with us today, but who brings so much innovation to the table. And so we all learn from each other, and we move forward together on this journey in a substantive way. A second point of alignment is even more important than José Pugas' shoes, which is, oh, that's the wrong slide. Yeah. Anyway, doesn't really matter. The second point of alignment is between the different data providers. So here I want to name and pay tribute to the Accountability Framework Initiative, a set of standards on tackling market-driven deforestation that for years has done work to establish effective approaches and equitable approaches to tackling deforestation in supply chains. All the data providers that you see here, who have all fed into Forest IQ in one way or another, all of us, because our tools are here too, have individually aligned our work with the Accountability Framework Initiative over the last many years. And even more than that, we have worked together as a group for 2 years, 2 full years, to work on what we called a common methodology for assessments under the Accountability Framework Initiative. So a huge amount of pre-work has gone into enabling the kind of platform and innovation that we are delighted to be launching today. And the third kind of alignment, because we're still on alignment, is across climate and nature. And I said a little bit about that before, but we get asked a lot by financial institutions, okay, you're asking us in your guidance to take these actions. Can you assure us, will it count, in inverted commas, towards emerging nature targets, to what the TNFD is saying? And we say, look, of course it will. How can we say that when the TNFD is just launched? Well, because we're talking to all the different players and all the different partners who are focused on alignment between these different parts of the system. So we'll explore that a little bit later on the panel. The second point, and it's already up there because the slides are in a funny order, is from alignment to best-in-class data. Now, I originally had the word accurate up there because I like the idea of having 3 A's, but colleagues said, accurate. How accurate is this data? And you can see that as a weakness, if you like, that best in class is truer than accurate. But we are dealing with inherently, in trying to assess these risks, we are dealing with risk, supply chain risk, uncertainty. And we have to embrace that uncertainty rather than pretend it's not there. And not let the uncertainty become a blocker. The data's not good enough, we can't do anything. The uncertainty's there, we have to deal with it. So Forest IQ aims to be an unblocker, to take an ecosystem approach. We heard about ecosystems earlier and the system being greater than the whole. Well, Forest IQ takes an ecosystem approach to data and looks for diversity of data, richness of data, transparency of data methods in order to build confidence and credibility and ultimately resilience. So that's the approach that we're taking. And to give you two examples here of the diversity of these data sets, which we've got up here, we have company reported data. Look, that's important. Companies tell us what they're doing. We at great length go and look at it in multiple languages, as both Forest 500, which Global Canopy runs, and ZSL Spot, which our friends at ZSL are running. We've got 10 years between us, 10 plus 10 of experience. We've been tightening these methodologies. We have over 2 million data points on corporate reporting on deforestation. And now in Forest IQ, we're bringing these together and we get more coverage. We align our methods and we get the upstream, sorry for the technical term, but the upstream in the supply chain focus of Spot with the downstream focus of Forest 500, and we cross many more commodities so that the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts for finance sector users. And another kind of data we're using, it's not enough to rely on company reported data because it's not always right. It's important that it's put out there so we can check it and hold companies to their statements, but sometimes companies don't even know what's going on in their supply chains. So here we're incorporating data from Trace, an open supply chain transparency platform pioneered by Stockholm Environment Institute and ourselves at Global Canopy as partners, and we're both partners in Forest IQ. And what you're looking at here is a snapshot of data on Brazilian exports of soy to China in a given year and the risk exposure, the differentiated risk exposure of deforestation among different trading companies. So that becomes a key data set that feeds into Forest IQ. So it's not just company reported data, but it's also using more independent, if you like, data sets on customs and trade data that Trace uses. And you can go to Trace and get the data for free and openly, but it's now feeding straight in. It's complicated if you're not an expert. So it's now feeding straight into these metrics in Forest IQ. So I went a little bit ahead of myself. We will also, this ecosystem, we want to evolve and grow richer over time. So two very quick examples. So how do we future-proof this setup? And maybe it's worth actually going back to this slide to say that, look, this isn't the be-all and end-all. This isn't the answer. It's the best-in-class data we have today. But what if an AI solution comes along tomorrow, or hopefully it does, that gives us brand new insights into the exposure or performance of companies? Well, with this system, we will feed it in as a data set into Forest IQ, but the high-level metrics remain the same, so that finance sector users can keep having the same metrics that they're going on, but know that this is resilient and to an extent future-proofed by the ability to bring in future data sets. And even now, before we wait for some Deus Ex Machina new solution, we are looking to deepen on particular areas where data is not strong enough. For instance, on social impacts, on human rights impacts related to deforestation. We've got some data on the platform. We've got the best-in-class data, but we want more. So we're looking at controversies information. How can we bring that in and feed that in to Forest IQ? So these are some of the ways we're working with best-in-class data. The third angle I want to look at is actionable information, the third lens that I'm going to briefly talk about. So from the start, our mission and our target audience with Forest IQ have been very clear. We are looking to support financial institutions with this information to move towards deforestation-free portfolios and sector-wide change. That is what we are doing. And to help us in that pursuit, for 2 years, we have had 10 financial institutions in a working group working very closely with us on the questions of how we can actually make this actionable, rather than what a group of civil society organizations think is the most important, the most rigorous, the most complete, right? So in the working group, we've had financial institutions of different sizes, some huge ones, in fact, including the world's biggest investor. We've had different types, banks, investors, insurers. We've had different regions covered. And frankly, we've also had differing levels of commitment and action on deforestation. But that's fine, because one of the things that connects and binds all of those groups is they are recognizing that for the finance sector, deforestation action is when, not if. And to get there, we need the best, most actionable data. So we're extremely grateful for their advice and support across this period, and we hope that it may long continue. What that group and our work over the last 2 years with all our partners in this space have come down on is a set of principles that I will quickly illuminate to show how this platform is a little bit different. The first is simplicity and pragmatism. So for that reason, with that goal in mind, we have 3 core metrics. I've already mentioned that, on exposure, materiality, and reported performance. So that should then allow simple use across portfolios, not 100 metrics, 3. The second principle, though, is depth and rigor. And so we've created a curated cascade of data, 3 at the top, then 15 indicators under the 3, and then under that, not 100 or 200, but 2,400 indicators, which we map to, which are the indicators of all those different data sets that were earlier on the screen. So we want to make it simple, but retain the depth and not throw away the incredible work that has been done with yet another tool and yet another set of metrics, but rather enable financial institutions to either screen their portfolios quickly, but in engagement to be able to drill down to a particular data set that has information, the best information about the company that is being engaged with, and then they can also pick up the phone to that group who've come up with that data. So this is really a curated cascade. The third principle is coverage. We want broad coverage so that large investors can know that they can run their portfolios effectively through the system. Today, we start with 2,000 companies for which we have all 3 core metrics. To be honest with you, it's a larger number than we could have hoped and dreamed that we would cover at our launch, but it's not enough. We want more because there are so many more exposed companies. So one of our top priorities will be working with the users to identify the quadrant of most exposed and most invested in companies to add them to the system. So coverage is critical. Cadence is the next principle. We need more updates. We're really proud of Forest 500. It's a great product. We've run it for 10 years, but it only updates once a year. So if you're about to do engagement with a company, you need to know if they have a new big announcement that affects this issue 3 weeks ago. Now, there are lots of practical challenges to that. With Forest IQ, we're being realistic. We're saying 2 updates a year as minimum, but our goal is clear. To achieve our mission, we are looking towards much faster cadence of updates, and even when we get a big announcement, we know it happens. So we want to get to near real-time updates, at least for big announcements by big companies. So we'll keep working on that. And the final principle that we're in pursuit of here is accessibility. So, and I mean that for the finance sector, for our finance sector target users. So we are incorporating corporate identifiers, ISINs, which don't exist on some of these platforms, so that can automate portfolio screening. We are building that into an API, and we are beginning now to talk to big ESG service providers to look at how we might have the data go onto the platforms where financial institutions already go, rather than creating new destinations. So those are my 3 lenses: alignment and the shoes, best in class or pseudo accuracy, and critically actionability. So what are we launching today to wrap up? Today, we are going live at forestiq.org with core metrics, two offerings. One, core metrics for 2,000 plus companies, and the mapping to underlying data sets, and all of those open data sets. So all of those things can be downloaded from forestiq.org today. It's open data. You can download it as a CSV file, and we welcome you to go and test it. And please help us to make it better. Tell us what you think. Tell us what's missing. The second thing that we're launching today is a financial institution offering, which is all the data, but we're adding in the corporate identifiers that I mentioned and an API to deliver it for the reasons that I've said. That will be operational in a month's time, but because the corporate identifiers are under license, this has to be licensed, and therefore we are asking financial institutions that are interested in this to begin today to talk to us so we can share the terms with you, hopefully get you licensed by December the 1st in 1 month, when we will go live with that functionality as well. So that's what we have. We have priorities for the coming months and years, which are, I've already pretty much covered, but for completeness, we want to add in more data sets, as I've said. We want to increase company coverage, better frequency of updates, and get analytics and visualizations on this huge amount of data to make it more sense. So we hope you will see ForestIQ as a powerful new ally on your journeys towards deforestation free, not only as financial institutions, but across sectors, because that's the only way we'll get to change. So please visit the website, share the website with colleagues, talk to our colleagues today if you're in the room. I will end just by saying a huge thank you. There are too many of my incredible colleagues to mention across 3 institutions who have been working so hard on this project. And so I thank each and every one of you for just a colossal effort, integrity, and dedication over several years. And critically, we will all continue to do this. And I want to thank Liz. I preemptively thank our incredible panel who are about to come and discuss all of this. And with that, I thank you very much, and do hope that you will go to forestiq.org. Thanks.
So, good evening. Hard job to step up here after everything we heard. I have to be honest, my name is Danielle Carreira. I work for the Tropical Forest Alliance, an initiative hosted by the World Economic Forum. I have been working on this agenda of deforestation and finance sector for many, many years. I would say over 10 years now, and many familiar faces here. It's great to see. And I think Niki has been very modest on what he's talking about the ForestIQ. 2012, back when I remember talking about deforestation with the financial sector, there was very little data. All these different databases that he pointed out was a huge complexity. So I think what we're achieving here today is absolutely phenomenal. I'm really, really happy. And I'm going to talk more about that with all the panelists here. I've got PRI, I've got Hermes, I've got Aviva, I've got TNFD. I'm not going to introduce myself, you're going to introduce yourselves, please. But I think the first question is going to be to Tim. We've been talking here to know about progress, lack of progress. We have been working on this agenda together for many years. You asked me not to be honest. So I'm going to keep that quiet. But where can you see progress, lack of progress, and why it's so urgent for the financial institutions to uptake this opportunity that they're being offered?
Thanks so much, Dani. So Just to introduce myself first, my name is Tim Steinweg. I'm the head of stewardship on nature for PRI. Have indeed been working for quite some time in this space, also in a number of NGO roles. So I was really staring at my shoes while listening to Niki. But to answer your question about the urgency, I think, you know, the answer has already been given, honestly. We're talking about a problem that, despite efforts for years, isn't going away. In fact, it's getting worse. You know, not just in Brazil, but if you look at global deforestation numbers, they're increasing. They were 10% higher in 2022 than they were in 2021. They're the third highest rates of deforestation globally this century. You know, and at the same time, we're also not successful yet in decoupling the global economy from deforestation. We're seeing, you know, I think the Food and Agriculture Organization projected record high food imports this year. And that includes a number of forest risk commodities, right? And so we have these food systems that are dependent on healthy nature, healthy forest, while at the same time also being one of the largest drivers of land use change and deforestation. I think another really crucial element is this idea of future risks, right? And not just in food, but also when you talk about, you know, the transition to electrification of transport, for example. I think the International Energy Agency projected a 6-fold increase in demand for transition minerals, many of which are found in forested areas. So the mining and the processing and the refining of those minerals can really have very harmful effects on exactly those systems that we depend on. And so also for the finance sector, this becomes more and more urgent. We're talking about planetary boundaries. We're talking about, you know, tipping points. We're talking about imminent risk of ecosystem collapse, right? But that scientists are projecting may happen much quicker than anticipated. And so from a finance sector perspective, I mean, all of this ultimately will touch the bottom lines of companies. It will touch the long-term value of investment portfolios and the health of the global economy. So I think the urgency is really in the state of the physical world.
Thank you, Tim. So, Emily, we're talking here about, you are here representing TNFD. I'm going to give time for you to introduce yourself as well, but we're talking about nature, how everything is interconnected, highly complex, from scientist perspective and financial sector perspective as well. How do you see deforestation potentially as the entry point to start acting now, please?
Thank you. Great to be here. My name is Emily McKenzie. I'm the technical director in the Secretariat that supports the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD as our snazzy acronym. And so we have just, as Niki alluded to in September, just launched a risk management and disclosure framework for corporates and financial institutions inspired by our climate equivalent, the TCFD, around nature-related issues, which covers how all of the issues that Liz was so eloquently telling us about, how our impacts are on nature, how we also depend on that same nature as a life support system, and then going further to how that creates risks and opportunities to organizations. And so we've created an integrated framework. Indeed, in many ways, we point to TCFD for its work on climate, but actually using the planetary boundaries as a framework, as Liz did, you see these interconnected Earth support systems. And we also create an interconnected framework building on all that's already been done that looks at specific types of ecosystems. So tropical forests, one very important biome. And then what we know from the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the equivalent of the IPCC, it best shows that there are 5 main drivers of nature change. A very important one is land use change. So there you have it. You have forests, you have land use change as an important driver. We also know climate change is an important driver, and those two are very interconnected. So all of this, we've tried to set out and create a common language, a common framework, and a common understanding for action, for disclosure, yes, but even more importantly, for taking action to manage these issues. And so to come to deforestation and the topic today, it's obviously, from all the presentations we've had here today, clearly an imperative for action on this particular issue. But it can be a learning ground for those organizations, those financial institutions, and those companies that obviously for years have been building towards all of that Niki laid out to get this point with Forest IQ's launch, there's lots of learning already happening. And you can't tackle all issues at once, right? So if this becomes a vehicle for, not for all, for some, there's going to be oceans, there's going to be fresh water, there are going to be, for certain sectors, for certain industries, other angles in, but for many, deforestation may be a first step. And what's exciting is also bringing the data and the metrics that have developed, because we'll need the organizations now moving in this space will need the data and the metrics to be able to take action. So the initiative is really exciting. The momentum in this area is clear, driven by regulation, by policy, and by increasing investor expectations. So we hope that many organizations will learn from deforestation as their first entry point, and then broaden. And the TNFD shows you how to do that, how to think about other ecosystems that are absolutely critical. Again, thinking in a structured way about your dependencies and impacts on those systems, what that creates as risks and opportunities to organizations. And then, of course, as one of the metrics in Forest IQ does, looking at how organizations are responding to that, through their governance, through their strategy, and through their risk management, and by setting targets that they then use to transition.
Thank you very much. So next, let's go to talk to the financial institutions. Eugenie, can you tell us a little bit what Aviva is trying to do to manage deforestation risks? And please be honest and include challenges as well, because we need to hear about the challenge to identify the solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. So I am the Nature Stewardship Lead at Aviva Investors, which is a UK fund manager, part of Aviva, the insurance company. We signed up at the Glasgow COP to the financial sector deforestation commitment, along with about 35 other financial institutions, which sounds like a large number, but actually is very small, unfortunately small, to try to eliminate deforestation from our portfolios by 2025. And given that we have holdings in thousands of companies, that is a very difficult thing to do, because as of today, I'm not aware of any deforestation-linked company that is buying from these supply chains that can actually say they have no deforestation in their supply chains for sure. So that's what we've been trying to do. And for the last year and a half, we've been trying to basically create what Forest IQ has done by assembling ourselves all the multiple data sources and mapping them to the thousands of companies that we own, to try to identify which companies have the greatest exposure to deforestation and which ones have the poorest policies, and therefore which ones we should be focusing on. We had a first go at that and published the results in a biodiversity report in December 2022. And we actually found that most of our exposure was via the financial sector, because we have a lot of holdings in other banks and other asset managers. Unfortunately, we didn't own too many of the really high risk, high impact companies like the Indonesian palm oil companies or Brazilian cattle companies. But we have been engaging with other FSDA members, with 5 companies and 5 financial institutions over the last year, to try to persuade them to strengthen their zero deforestation policies and actions, with varying different levels of success. This year we've been working on updating our deforestation risk assessment with a new data set, which has just been incredibly complicated and taken far more time than we would have thought. I don't know why it's taken so long just to figure out that Unilever's deforestation score in Forest 500 matches to Unilever in our databases, but it's ridiculously complicated with the ISINs and the parents and the subsidiaries and all that sort of stuff. It's very dull. None of us are data scientists. We don't know how to do it. So I'm really, really grateful that this tool might be doing that for us. What we want to do is then expand our deforestation engagement program to a lot more companies, to try and put greater pressure on them to make sure that there'll be no deforestation in their supply chains. We've also added deforestation as an issue to our voting policy. So we have been for the last 2 years automatically voting against companies who score lower than a certain score in the Forest 500 deforestation scoring system. So that's pretty much what we've been doing, and we do hope to expand that. It's not enough, and it is going to be very challenging to meet our commitments to eliminate deforestation by 2025, but we are trying.
Thank you very much. So we heard a lot about companies disclosing data. There is only so much companies can do as well. I think we've heard here the importance of collaboration across sectors, across regions, And there we go, and across peers as well. I've heard one CEO a few years ago talking about competition, and that is something that I'm never going to forget. We need more competition on the financial sector. So I'm going to pass the word for Gemma now. Can you talk us a little bit about the systemic approach that Hermes is taking? And please introduce yourself as well before you start.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gemma Corrigan. I lead the policy and integration work within Federated Hermes. Like you, Jenny, we also signed up to this FSDA commitment in Glasgow, and we've been on a very similar journey ever since. And we've, started to assess our deforestation risk in our portfolios. Forest IQ is very welcome, and it is something that we think will be a game changer to get other financial institutions also on board to make similar types of commitments and address some of those dire statistics we heard from at the very beginning. But company engagement is very important, but it's not enough. We really need to do also country level engagement, because even if we set these bold and ambitious commitments and the investee companies are doing that, we need obviously the proper enforcement of forest countries to also make sure that we're actually delivering on them. And so we've been very involved in a range of initiatives, including the IPDD. And we've been looking at the excellent legislation that's been coming out of Europe when we look at the due diligence directives, as well as the product level bans on commodity-driven deforestation, and thinking about how do we also get these adopted in other markets, because we don't want a double market. Obviously, that will be anti-competitive, and then we'll have the backlash that we're starting to see here. So I think it's imperative that we have a global level playing field. There's been some interesting progress. So we've been talking to Brazilian government, the Indonesian government, the US, and also China also has a timber-related policy, Article 65. So that's only covering China, so it doesn't go as far as any of the European legislation, but it is an entry point that we can start engaging. We can look at other commodities and perhaps, sourcing from other countries in the region. So I think it's very important to complement the company engagement with country level engagement. I think COP28 is coming up. It's a big moment whenever we're talking about climate change and net zero commitments. Obviously, deforestation has a big role to play in that. And coming out of Montreal, COP15, countries are also setting their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So now it's really the time for delivery, and it's important for financial institutions also to hold the public sector to account to make sure that we're actually all able to deliver on these very bold promises, and we have the data obviously to back it up, so we can also bring that to them and really put pressure where we're seeing perhaps some regions going backwards, as we've heard. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is it's also important to increase forest-friendly investment. So it's not only about minimizing risks, but it's also about thinking about opportunities that this also presents. So we've been doing some work in partnership with DEFRA to create this big nature impact fund to protect and restore degraded ecosystems in the UK. So that includes things like agroforestry and sustainable timber. And taking this model and seeing how we can also apply it in other regions so that there's also revenue streams for protecting and restoring nature. We hear a lot about biodiversity credits now rising on the horizon. We have debt for nature swaps. There's a lot of financial innovation happening and especially in the blended finance space. And so we hope that will also be another impetus that will help bring this further up the agenda, and that we go from the 2 billion or so invested into the 200s. So that's what I'm hoping from COP.
Fantastic. That's really good to hear. So I'm going to go back to you, Tim. We heard here Niki talking about alignments, about bringing different bits together, like we've seen here with this new tool. Where do you see the opportunity and the need for further collaboration, please?
Well, I think an obvious answer lies in stewardship and investor engagement. So this is something that at PRI we're working on. We're developing Spring, which is our collaborative stewardship initiative on nature, really with the intention of bringing together PRI signatories to engage with companies collectively and in a coordinated fashion. I think it's very clear that there's both efficiency and effectiveness benefits to doing that type of stuff collectively. And also doing that in a way that is additional to what's already out there. So there are a lot of different nature-related stewardship initiatives. There are a lot of other initiatives, and really, as we are designing our program now, trying to be additional. And I think one of the ways in which we're doing this really touches on what you're talking about in terms of the policy engagement and the recognition that, systemic issues like deforestation require systemic solutions that also lie in public policies. What we're trying to do with Spring, one of the things we're trying to do is to be additional by also addressing the role of companies that in terms of their engagement with policymakers. So really pushing for responsible political engagement of those actors that are influential voices in policy processes in such a way that it does become synergetic and additional to IPDD, to some of the other engagement processes that really touch on companies' own operations or the way that they manage their supply chains, and really touching on that element as well. And I think this type of thinking of, okay, how can we do this together? How can we build on the work of others? How can we complement? I think this is really where the massive momentum that we've seen on this topic in recent years, heading in that direction, does give me hope.
Thank you. And I think the same question to you, Emily, please. Where can we improve?
On alignment and collaboration and consistency, yeah. Well, I think we're building on great momentum. So a lot has been achieved. You can see this as one example in creating this common language and structure. I don't, people often will complain, I think Niki alluded to it, that it's getting too complex, there are too many data, there's too much data, there's too much tools. I'm skeptical of that. I think that's a maturing of all the innovation, and we're going to need multiple things to solve multiple challenges that are quite specific to different types of ecosystem, like for forestry. We have ourselves developed biome guidance, different guidance is going to be needed for different systems, and so are the tools and data sets. But what we do need desperately, and we hope with TNFD's framework to have started that real progress, is in creating that common language and a common structure under which all of that can nest and fit. Because unless people are speaking the same language, understand the same concepts, it's paralyzing. So, and that then cascades in from the concepts all the way down to a sort of process that you put in place for improving your risk management, your governance and your strategy, setting the targets and doing the measurement. So all of that, I think we're making really good progress, but it needs to continue, that whole dialogue. And in particular on one thing Niki emphasized, one of his 3As that weren't actually 3As, but was actionable. So it's the collaboration. What we've seen has been really powerful is the collaboration between the data and analytics and measurement providers with the users, including financial institutions and corporates. We established a nature-related data catalyst, which brings together about 130 data providers. And we have these incredibly powerful sessions, I imagine, like the working group that's created Forest IQ, that brings the users, whether they're report preparers or users, together with the data providers, and they say, well, we get this far enough, and then we get stuck. And the data providers say, well, actually, we can fix that, or we could fix that if we did this. And it really stimulates innovation, collaboration that then blossoming. So those sorts of initiatives that bring the users with the providers, I think, are really working well, and we need to continue those sorts of conversations.
Fantastic. And I would like to hear now from a financial sector perspective how we can increase the competition and the collaboration and the alignment as well. I think we have an example here with two financial institutions that are extremely collaborative. They work within major groups. How can we increase the scale now to bring the rest together?
I think it's a challenging environment at the moment because seems to be a bit of a backlash against working collaboratively, particularly coming out of America, and the fear that people have that there's the crackdown there. But luckily in Europe, there seems to be still keenness to increase collaboration and work together on this. But I think what we need to see companies doing more is really focusing on traceability. And I remember working with apparel companies, one of Britain's biggest clothes shops in the early 2000s, and they were coming under sort of panorama exposés for the labor standards in their supply chains. And we said to them, well, do you know where your factories are and what the labour standards are. And they said, well, we think we buy from about 2000, but we've got no idea what goes on in them. And I said, well, you think you better find out? And they said, oh, it's too expensive. Our consumers won't pay for that in the cost of the T-shirts we're selling. Now they have, I think, over at least 100 staff working full-time on that, just checking the labour standards and environmental standards in their supply chains. It's become the cost of doing business, social license to operate. I think that will happen with deforestation commodities too. We speak time and time again to companies who say, for example, in the Brazilian cattle sector, oh, you can't trace the cattle past the first farm. They typically pass through 5 or 6. It's too expensive. We can't do that. The government needs to do it, and the government says the companies need to do it. It can't be done, but it can be done, and it should be the expectations of businesses in that sector. And I think, secondly, one of the important areas for collaboration is, I think we've got a lot of financial sector collaboration from investors, but not enough from the banks. And they have even greater leverage than investors do over the companies they're lending money to. They're financing projects, they're directly lending money to companies that they need to have zero deforestation policies and better monitoring of those. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would add, in addition to the banks, we need more asset owners as part of this conversation. We need all the sovereign wealth funds to think about their deforestation exposure and their nature-related risks. And I think we need to get all this rich real-time data we have on the ground to map up to Eugeni's point on the supply chains, to know where are the companies located. And we have 2 parts of the puzzle, and we just have to bring them together. And I would really hope that the experience of this aligned accountabilities Forest IQ could also be applied to other drivers of biodiversity loss. So waste, water, there are plenty of other issues where there's a lot of organizations working. There's quite dispersed and fragmented information, and perhaps with the TNFD, we could take some of those learnings and that model and also share more openly. We launched our impact database last week for our biodiversity impact fund. It has 20 KPIs. I encourage you all to look at it. It's open source, and we want everyone to be doing this, because this is what we need to do to be able to turn the tide.
Thank you. And I think it's really important, because Niki was saying about is not perfect, it's not super accurate. Unless you use the data, you're not going to find out, and we can't improve. So I think getting to use immediately what is there available is how we're going to improve. There is someone in the room here, or a few of them, but I'm going to put someone in the spot, who has been also involved in the development of the Forest IQ. So I'm going to just steal your mic here. You got one there? Okay. So, Robico, Peter, please. You have been involved in the development of this tool. It would be great to hear from you what excites you and what else do you need, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Peter van der Werf, Head of Engagement, and have been involved indeed in much of the engagement that we've done with the finance sector deforestation action working group with ESG data providers, because we, on the back of our commitment, came to the same conclusion. We don't have the data to actually screen all of our portfolios. And I think, from our perspective, Forest IQ really provides a very clear tool, and I really like the word actionable, that is, I think, the best element of what investors are currently looking at, because we just have too many data sets that we need to bring together. So from that perspective, I'm really happy to see Forest IQ go live today, and from that perspective, that we as an asset manager can now really start applying this in our deforestation risk assessment.
Fantastic, thank you. I just want to check if anyone else in the audience have any questions, because I am receiving some questions online via WhatsApp, but I first want to see if there is any questions from the floor. No? So I'm gonna go online here. You're gonna have to be patient, because this is small and I can't read. Deforestation is driving me a little bit of eyesight problem. Spending too long on a computer. And Niki, I have to say that I received a message from my WhatsApp as well, from Jose Pulgas, saying that he wants further alignment on the shoe and he may buy you some new shoes. So get ready. So, I will try my best here. It is very small, the letter. But so the first speaker, Liz, is a question for you, I think. You spoke about the need for paradigm shift. How do you think forest IQ data can support the financial sector to play the role in the paradigm shift? For example, instead of avoiding risk-supporting investments for companies to take actions to make their own paradigm shift. So maybe you can have a go on that, but I may give to the investors as well, yeah?
Is my microphone still working?
Yeah,
Thanks.
okay.
Yeah, when it comes to it's a very specific, well, it's a specific but very good question about how in practice it goes ahead. As a biologist, I'm learning about, what I will say is that it's reverting back to what I am understanding about what else needs to play a part in the decisions we make. So we've got the data and we've got the financial sector. I always just want to put that piece of the puzzle in that I feel is really crucial is, can we really achieve what we want to achieve if the system still prioritizes profit and shareholder, results, And actually, that's the question. I'm going to pass, kind of use that. Please answer that much more eloquently than I can. But also, I wonder, is that one of the obstacles that we need to continue to help to shift and transform? Do you think we can achieve what we need to achieve as a matter of urgency without dealing with that aspect of things? The bottom line, the profits that, are the system demands of all industries and the finance sector.
So I think that's really important. Science talking to finance.
Yeah,
there we go.
And also, can I just really quickly say, I'm the
Sure.
president of the Wildlife Trust, and I have been working with Aviva on their recovery of rainforests. We have rainforests in the UK, temperate rainforests, and I was on the Isle of Man on a panel with the local government, Aviva, and conservation. And that, to me, is the sweet spot. It's the true, when I talk about collaboration, that was the perfect mini world example of what needs to happen going forward. So I'm a huge fan of what Aviva is doing. So I just wanted to say that because I'm really glad to see you here. But yeah, that's the question really for you in the financial sector and all the esteemed panelists, with respect to that paradigm shift. When I speak of paradigm shift in my talk, that is what I mean, what we prioritize.
So Eugenie, Gemma, anything that you'd like to?
We definitely need to look at a longer term investment horizon. Obviously, all of these risks will be very material. I mean, they're already very material, but if you have a slightly longer horizon, this is going to be a huge financial impairment and a destruction of value. So I think we're only starting to wake up to the materiality of these risks. And I think the more we can move towards a more long-term stakeholder-driven model, then obviously, I think that's the way that the shift we need. I also think we need consumers on board. We haven't really talked about them. How are we going to shift our food system if we don't also change, dietary preferences? We need to have meat consumption, and then maybe we won't be cutting down the forest for the cattle. Absolutely. So I think we also have to get to the source of these systemic issues as well and bring all the stakeholders and their interests together. So it's key.
Thank you. Would you like to add?
I can't improve on that.
Wise.
Yes, please. Yeah, sure.
Yes, I'd love to go for a drink with Liz afterwards to talk about this at length, but this is prior to my TNFD hat on. I worked on a review that was commissioned by the UK government, but an independent review called the Dasgupta Review on the Economics of Biodiversity, which was, again, inspired by the Stern Review on the Economics of Climate Change, and it looks at these issues in depth. And in a nutshell, it says we need to change how we think, how we act, and how we measure success. The measurement of success, your points about GDP are absolutely appropriate. GDP was created out of World War II at a time where unemployment was our major concern and we hadn't reached these planetary boundaries. We now know that we have reached these planetary boundaries, so we have to reconsider how we measure success. And that comes to actually a critique of how our economic models are established. They don't actually incorporate an understanding of ecology, earth systems, and planetary boundaries, and when they do, they have major implications for how ministries of economics set policy and how all of us operate. But fundamentally, what we should be measuring is not income, which is GDP, but our assets, and seeing nature as an asset. And there is widespread work on that. And And then fundamentally coming back to what we're talking about on this panel, in the absence of that coming from government and policy driven by all of us as citizens, I think there is a lot of this momentum is coming from action by the private sector, who are at the front end of seeing these risks, right, in supply chains. We saw the examples you provided from deforestation. So they're filling a gap. I mean, these are missing markets. And so then you have this action and disclosure as a way to try to drive change. But fundamentally, you still need the engagement with government and policymakers, because the two things have to be combined. So it's a really powerful and important point. What we're talking about here has to be in that wider perspective to really create the system change we need.
Thank you. Would you like to?
Yeah, just maybe a final point. I think it slightly alludes this discussion to ultimately a false dichotomy between profit or nature. Like it isn't a choice between one or the two. It's a dependency of one on the other. And that really holds true for universal asset owners, right? So if you're an investor and you hold shares in thousands of companies, any short-term profit that can be get from, let's say nature destruction of any one individual company is completely outweighed by the cost borne by other companies in your portfolio. So it really touches on this fiduciary duty, recognizing that, we're talking about something that is going to affect us all. The cost of inaction is going to be much greater than the cost of action today. So it really, and it isn't, you're touching on the long term. It is a long-term risk, but it's becoming less and less long-term, right? And I think you actually gave a really good speech to illustrate that. So just wanted to point that out.
Yes, and I think we got finance here, you love numbers. I think one interesting point about lack of action increasing the price actually is Brazil, the inflation data, and that was on the report from the Brazilian Central Bank. Because of the drought in Brazil, and as we heard here, no forest, no water, the inflation was 0.6%, the inflation target last year. So it is costing already. It's not about climate change, it's a climate risk that is happening now, right now. And yeah, forest is in the middle of climate and nature. There is another question here from online. So Niki, yeah, I think you're gonna have to sit here as part of the panel. So next steps. There was a question here online asking to talk how we will decide which data sets to include in ForestIQ as best in class as the tool develops, and when do you expect to expand the company coverage?
Thank you very much. Great question. So first it was accurate, then it was best in class. And I'm wondering if that is the right term. We need to include as many data sets as we possibly can, but there are certain criteria for that. And one of those criteria that to my mind is objective, really, is alignment with the Accountability Framework Initiative and the work that goes into that. Now, that's not a critical prerequisite, but the way that ForestIQ works is, as we've heard already, having high-level indicators that then map down to intermediaries and then map down into data sets, and part of its power comes from that. So I think that's the first criteria, which is really important, is that we're using data sets that can play a part of that cascade. I think if a new data set comes along tomorrow that doesn't fit those criteria, then but has a real contribution to make on one aspect of the problem that is critical, we will absolutely do that work ourselves to bring it into the mix. And I think we will be guided by, in particular, some priority areas where more data is required. We just know that it's required. So if you look at, for instance, the social and human rights aspects associated with deforestation, we know that there isn't enough good data at the moment. That's well understood. And therefore, that is a priority area. We will also, of course, be guided by finance sector and other users, because let's repeat that there's a lot of open data here, which is useful to, we hope, to very many different types of users, but we will be guided by the users in pointing to the indicator sets that they also need and want. So those are some of the principles we will adopt. I mean, of course, there are some incredible platforms and data sets out there that, you know, are best in class in their own right in incredible ways that just aren't compatible to fit in. I mean, I can think of many off the top of my head. So a final thing I'll say is openness helps. You know, open data and open data sets. That means we can include them with the mapping. We can share all the data straight out. So the more there is open data, the more we can easily incorporate into the system and share it. So, you know, I've been hearing in the last days about the contagion of closed data, and we really want the, you know, the contagion of open data, openness to lead to more openness so we get more transparency. In terms of companies covered, look, we just launched the tool today. There are a lot of companies on there. We want to get, the most important thing for us is actionability driven by real world users. So we really, again, I take the opportunity to ask financial institutions who are here or who are online, please work with us on this, come on board, use the tool, and then tell us what's missing. Because then our commitment is we will, in 2024, we will add a new swathe of companies. We will make that number as big as possible, but we have to be guided by you on what's currently there. Is that the right set of companies? Who are the most invested and most exposed that are not there? Tell us and we'll work on it.
Thank you very much. So your last chance to ask Niki directly, online, live, what else do you want from Forest IQ? Eugenie, do you want to go first? Putting you on the spot.
Well, I think we should put colleagues Sarah and Freya on the spot, you know, and so many others because I'm just a spokesperson for the incredible work that so many people have done, but Eugenie.
I've had a look at it today and it looks so overwhelmingly a plenitude of everything we've been looking for a long time. So I have definitely nothing right now that I can think of that it needs to look at. And I think even 2,000 companies is probably enough because hopefully there aren't that many massive companies in the world that are listed companies that are really driving deforestation. So I think 2,000 is a really good start. So I'm very pleased with what it sounds like it's doing already.
I loved what Gemma suggested, which is learning from this example, Forest IQ, to feed to others. So if we could take this as an example and then have a commitment to share what you're doing through the Data Catalyst and otherwise, so others can learn from it, that would be great. And then I also want to go through all your indicators and metrics and line them up with ours and see how they fit. So we could actually, for those who actually do want to get into the granular detail, see exactly how your metrics and indicators fit into the TNFD framework. So that'll be fun. Look forward to doing that with Niki and his team very soon.
So yeah, the launch is just starting the work, yeah? It's not the baby's just been born, now it's when we're really gonna start working.
Oh, the list is long. I would love if we could start to cover also the marine environment beyond the terrestrial ecosystems, but also looking at other issues that intersect. So I think one thing the financial institutions struggle with is also trying to weigh climate-friendly policies that might be nature negative, or how, for example, to some of the earlier points that Tim raised, one can also, you know, there's some activities that are not net positive, let's say, and as we're all trying to move towards nature positive, you know, maybe trying to expose and look at how these different business activities, sectors are also contributing to some of the trends. So I think some of the bigger meta learnings maybe would be useful. And then how do we get this in the hands of other actors that are crucial beyond financial institutions, I think is also really important, so that we're driven, there's more demand driving more of us to eliminate commodity-driven deforestation from our portfolios. So just a few, but I'm sure my team, we love what you're doing. We'll be using it. So they'll definitely be in touch with a lot more ideas, I'm sure.
Maybe just a really brief last reflection in addition to all the good points raised. Just thinking about, you know, the nature of trying to address deforestation needs to have a forward-looking element. Right? We want to prevent deforestation from happening in the future. And just reflecting on where you see some of the dynamics of the drivers of deforestation also changing, and some of the new drivers emerging, transition minerals being an example of that. The same type of work that's been done on agricultural commodities to look into some of the supply chains that rely on those, let's say, forest risk minerals. I think there's a ton of really interesting insights that could be gained from that.
So you got a new one now, forest risk minerals. There we go. No, I think thank you very, very much. We're gonna wrap up here unless there is any final burning questions from the audience. But I think it has been a very interesting discussion. I would like to say congratulations again for all the team behind Forest IQ. Like I said, I think you've been very humble. It's amazing what we have achieved. And I would like to end with a sentence that I've heard from Marina Silva a few weeks ago on an event, that we heard that the planet has boundaries, but there is no boundaries for what we can do as a citizen and human beings to address these issues here. So let's get together and act. Yeah, thank you very much for everyone to be here.
I think the panelists are free to go now. You've sat there long enough. My job is very simple. I'm Oliver Cupit, and I am here from ZSL, one of the Forest IQ partners. I'm going to not keep you between the drinks for too long. So I just wanted to say a very quick thank you to everybody for joining, whether you've joined online or in the room. A big, big thank you to all of the Forest IQ partners, including Global Canopy, who have really driven the development of this project, to colleagues at ZSL and to SEI York as well, and to, again, all of you in the panelists, and to Liz for really focusing us on the mission. It's easy to get really stuck into the detail and lose the vision of why are we here. So it's always good to bring us back to that starting point. And thanks to everybody, because I know that you're going to spend all of the next day tomorrow delving into all the Forest IQ data and seeing how can you use this and make it actionable. But yes, thank you very much for joining us.